So, Patti, I really enjoyed our podcast today, having
Yeah.
Josh Benedetti back on to talk about creating a modern payments company and what kind of goes into that. I thought it
hmm
was very interesting, actually.
Yeah, I really did. And I really liked how you kind of continued the theme in your questions from the field. Would you like to give people a little bit of a tip on
Yeah,
a hint on that?
talk about raising capital.
hmm
I just give you the very, very short version to hopefully start to point you in the right direction of should you do buyouts, should you borrow against residual, should you bring on investors, should you go private equity, should you not get any outside capital,
Right.
raise it yourself. So
What
I've
are all
done,
the different options and what are the downsides?
yeah, I mean, between my own companies and the companies I consult for, I have seen every possible one of these strategies play out in
hmm
every possible way. So I just share a little bit of that experience. And then, Patty, tell us about the insiders report today.
Just some update on fraud. And there's some really interesting trends and some really salient data points that I think everybody should be aware of.
Awesome. And
So
our episode today is sponsored by NMI.com. So check out the leading gateway provider in the industry. It's NMI.com. I don't know about you, Patty, but I'm ready to go.
let's do it.
Hey, everybody. Patty and I are here today with Josh Benedetti, the CEO at CardsIn. How are you doing today, Josh?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing fantastic. So we are going to talk about building a modern payments company. Topic I've been wanting to cover. I mean, we've kind of touched on some of these topics, but we haven't really brought it all together. And Josh, I know you're kind of right in the midst of, building one of these companies that I would consider a modern payments company. And so really excited to talk to you about it. Before we dive into that, maybe there's some who didn't listen to the last interview we did together. So can you give us kind of the elevator pitch of like, what is CardsIn, and tell us about your journey of, starting and leading this organization?
Yeah, so I actually started off in finance investment banking, went into aerospace and defense contracting for like 10 plus years. Realized there was a big disconnect between that industry and payments. And basically, with a little direction from my wife, kind of like, what's the next, journey that we're going to go on? We started CardsIn. And it was basically to bridge that disconnect between the aerospace industry and payments. They pay high rates, slow deposit times, things like that. So we did that, and then we realized that model would work in other industries, and so then we kind of expanded from there.
Cool. Cool. That was pretty succinct.
Yeah. No,
but it's an interesting path. I'm wondering, if you go back to the beginning, as you were preparing to launch CardsIn, how did you think about the brand and brand messaging? What exactly were you trying to establish in the marketplace?
So we really wanted to focus on technology with a human touch, and that's been kind of our motto from day one. You have a lot of competitors in the industry, and they focus really heavily on development, technology, automation, but we lose that human touch, that human connection. And as much as everybody wants stuff now and they want it fast and they want it streamlined, they still want to feel like they're valued, like they're a person. They still want to have that connection with somebody, be able to pick up the phone and call somebody if they want support, or chat with somebody on a messenger. So that's been our primary focus, is just making sure that we have that human touch in every aspect. And that's really helped us with like our KYC and really developing programs for our merchants as we're onboarding them and as we're helping them scale and filling any gaps that they have. Having that human touch, it really goes a long way in the relationship.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I love that you brought this up, actually, Josh. This is something that I'm really passionate about. As you know, with like our ISO AMP company, this is what we do. And I think it's so interesting because I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, from a pure kind of technology perspective. What I find is trying to completely eliminate human interaction in technology. It's like you get to 90% what the computer does 90% of it, and anything could be a variety of things. And, the last 10%, to automate it, usually it is disproportionately expensive to build that technology, and it generally fails at a disproportionately high level, leading to a poor experience. And so what's interesting is I think a lot of the exciting tech today is how do we automate so much of the process, but we still identify that 5 to 10% of the process where the human interaction is cost effective and it's generating that experience. I don't know. Any other thoughts? I don't know. I didn't know we were going to bring that up, but I'm so passionate about that as well. I'm kind of curious. Any other thoughts you have about that?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. And I don't know where that fine line is and where
Right.
that perfect ratio and mix is.
Yeah.
But I've heard numerous times from merchants and from customers that they really value that. And it's not just, everybody talks about the race to zero. Oh, I can save you money in payments. And
Right.
I've actually had people say, I'll pay a couple extra points just to have somebody to talk to. Somebody who can give me a little guidance, educate me on the industry, bring different products and services that could help my business grow. So just not having that like PayFac, instant onboarding, instant approval, here's your login credentials, do it yourself, does go a long way. And we've seen that numerous times with our customers.
I love this. I think it's these are the conversations that our industry needs to be having, right? It's like when we think about our customer experience and we think about the processes that they go through, whether that's onboarding, whether that's looking at their monthly reports, whatever it is, using the point of sale. The question is, the question shouldn't be how can we eliminate the maximum amount of human involvement.
No.
The question should be, where does human involvement still make sense, and how can we eliminate human involvement in areas where it doesn't add value, right? And I think that's super important. So in talking about technology, let's again kind of go back a little bit here. So we're talking about building a modern payments company. I know you're kind of through your kind of seed stage, I guess we'd say, in kind of entrepreneurial terms, and now you're moving forward and growing. And so I'm kind of curious, when you say, okay, we wanted to bring payments to aerospace, like at the very beginning, what did you need and how were you thinking about technology at that point? And then how has your vision shifted over time? Because I know in a modern payments company, you're really thinking about technology, not as kind of this afterthought, but as a core part of your strategy. So how did you think about technology at the beginning, and what did you have or need to build or whatever? And then how are you thinking about that today? How's that kind of evolved?
Evolved quite a bit.
Yeah.
So when we first started it was, very standard ISO model, standard applications, standard onboarding process. We actually partnered with NMI, and we were, building out profiles and pushing level 3 data and things like that to help maximize, discounts and so forth for the customers. And that's basically where we were in the process. And obviously we worked with, our acquiring banks to say, hey, these are the type of profiles, the risk, the credit, everything that we were going to be bringing in that first group, so that we could streamline the onboarding process so that they knew what the credit risks were, and we could do next day deposits for $225,000 tickets and all of that. Right. Now that's drastically evolved. Now we're looking at like real-time payments, moving money instantly, microtransactions, marketplaces, taking all of these different products and services like fraud scrubbing in the beginning and chargeback mitigation in the back, where typically a standard ISO model is you have 3D Secure as one vendor, then you have like your reporting is all your CRM dashboards, stuff like that. You have a gateway, and then you have chargeback mitigation on the back end, and it's all segregated. And so what we're doing is we're bringing that all into one central location, database interface, creating that seamless user experience and providing the different payment methods that people are looking for. We're currently working with an airlines out of South America and onboarding them. And just the landscape in Central South America is drastically different from the US. They don't believe in banking. They don't believe in credit cards. They've over the past 3 years, their market has drastically shifted towards like e-wallets and crypto. And so they're doing a lot of digital transactions. And so that's a completely different model from, an ISO in the US and how they would view payments.
Interesting. So when we think about vertical focus, this is another kind of I feel like a key trend for that modern payments company there. It's like, okay, technology's at the core, and we're thinking about technology, which clearly you are. But then one of the other key pillars is this idea of vertical focus. And so, we may serve lots of verticals, but it's the idea that we feel like we have a competitive advantage or solution to the verticals that we focus on. So talk about, what I'm curious mainly is, and you've already touched on the aerospace, but kind of talk about why you decided to go after that one initially. And then what I'm really curious to hear from you is how, as you expand the verticals you go after, how do you maintain the competitive edge, right, while expanding that? Because you got to stay focused. You got to make sure you're adding value to the businesses you're working with, but you also can't stay with just one vertical. It's very difficult to build an entire business based on that. So I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so after we realized that what we were doing in the aerospace industry worked really well, and because of the increased risk, from acquiring banks for that specific vertical, and they like to lump travel into that, we then said, okay, well, what other industries would this work for? And then we realized that this would work for CBD. It would work for crypto exchanges. You know, all types of different high risk verticals, gaming, gambling. And so what we did was we basically went in every area and said, we need a acquiring partner to help us with this specific industry or vertical. Our back end blew up enormously. So we ended up going from, 2, 3 acquiring partners to like 30, 40 different partners. And then I said, okay, this is a little difficult to manage. So you start paring it back. Who can, cover multiple industries? Who's interested in adding a new vertical and putting together like the compliance programs that makes the acquirers and acquiring banks happy that you can manage the risk and that you know what you're doing. And so when we pushed beyond that, we went into like CBD. And so we immediately worked on the compliance portion of it, checking the COAs, making sure, how quickly can we get these done? There's still a big human component in that industry because you have to review these manually. And so we've gotten that down to a 24 to 72 hour approval time. So that's fairly fast, depending on how many products they have.
Right.
But then we realized that, hey, look, this isn't just in the US that these companies are looking for this. This is also in the UK, Europe. And so we wanted to be able to support all these verticals that your standard, PayFacs and ISOs don't support. So we immediately found partners in Europe and the UK to support CBD. And as far as I know, we were one of the leaders for being able to support multi-country North America and Europe for CBD. You had maybe some in Europe and some in the US, but nothing that really crossed the pond. So we worked on that, and then we applied that to other industries like crypto exchanges. So having that human touch again with these individuals. How are you structuring this? What is a lot of people don't realize that they are involved in that payment process because they're on-ramping funds to their platform, to a coin, to an exchange, and then they're allowed to hold that coin there. So they're involved in that. So they're also responsible for KYC and AML. How are they handling their risk? And really sitting down and talking with these individuals and not just having a plug and play and then, oops, if there's a red flag, now we're going to try to figure out, is this compliant? Is it not? And so we've developed a lot of internal processes and procedures and workflows to try to automate as much of this process as possible, make it quick, streamlined. But like I said in that beginning, and once or twice in the process, a human does have to come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is so interesting. One of the things I want to talk about a little bit is lead generation. So if we kind of shift gears a little bit and talk more about growing the business. So we talked about the tech piece and all of that, and that's super important. But I want to talk about how do you generate leads for this thing? So Let's start with aerospace. Obviously, that was, I'm sure, quite interesting. I know you had some context there, so maybe talk about how you leverage that. How did you generate leads? But then as you start into something like CBD, where I'm assuming you didn't have a ton of connections, that was more of a newer vertical. How are you generating leads? And how has that kind of evolved over time in terms of, how do you get leads today to continue the growth of the company?
So when we first started, I mean, it was pound the pavement. Well, maybe not pound the pavement like door to door like retail, but it was cold calling. It was a numbers game. Obviously, we reached out to existing contacts, people we knew in the industry, and that helped us get in the door. But then it was like, hey, what's the added value here? So we originally were talking to an ISV in the aerospace industry that had a CRM platform. And we said, hey, look, you could plug this in and allow companies to take payments right in the system, reconcile it. Almost like an entire QuickBooks concept for the aerospace industry.
Right.
We were taking care of the payments, they were doing all the inventory and accounting.
Right.
So we went that approach. And then it started to kind of just turn into a referral business from there. And then as we went into other industries like CBD, we've tried it all: pay-per-click, review sites, cold calling, email marketing, text marketing. We've tried it all. And there are drastically different results. I am not a big fan of pay-per-click. I think it's very
overpriced.
Yeah, very overpriced. The ROI on it's horrible. And with all the bots out there now today, it's very difficult to manage. So we actually, as we've evolved, we've started working with channel partners and or referral partners, which is the kind of bread and butter of where our stuff comes off of. So we've partnered with ISVs that have done integrations to us, and then they do the sales for us and then refer those clients once they close the merchant on their software platform. Referral partners is another big one. Some we provide rev shares to, some we use their service, they use our service. There's a lot of different models, but that referral partner and channel partners is a big one. And I think you just did a segment on that recently.
I did.
Yeah.
How like you work with individuals to really provide a complete solution. That's been very successful for us.
Yeah. And so what do you think going forward though, Josh? I mean, it sounds to me like this is sort of an evolving thing, the process is evolving. How do you see deal closing, evolving going forward? I mean, it's obviously changed since you started out, right?
Right, and that's been in a couple of years, and over the next 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to see drastic changes in the payment landscape. Real-time payments is still kind of evolving and coming out, and everybody's really big on crypto, trying to decentralize stuff. It's going to be interesting to see how these evolve laterally together. I think there'll be some crossover and merging between this stuff. I know Visa and MasterCard are working on, crypto or using blockchain to facilitate fraud and transactions, which is good. It provides that transparency, the openness, validation, and so forth. I don't know where it's going to end up in the next 5 to 10 years, but I think it's going to be very different from where we are at currently.
Yeah. But do you, I'm just curious. I mean, I think we can probably all agree that they're probably going to be different, but that human element, I'm really interested in that. Do you see that human element sort of prevailing going forward?
To a point. I think different groups of individuals have different opinions on if they want automation or they want that human interaction. But I have seen that across all groups, when there's an issue, they still want that human person to talk to. They want it answered now. They don't want a boilerplate answer. People get so aggravated so quickly with that. So
They don't want an email that says, "We got your request. We'll get back to you eventually." Right?
yeah.
I mean,
And some people are like, okay, if it's a non-priority issue, 24 hours I can deal with.
right.
Over that, they kind of just like that's unacceptable.
Sure.
And especially because the way the world's moving now, money's moving faster, we're moving faster,
Right.
international travel, everything's moving faster. So you need to figure out how to leverage technology with that human interaction to be able to move stuff fast and rapidly, because that's what the consumer is really looking for: less friction, faster. But in the end, I still want to have a human person I can interact with.
Yeah.
I've got one last question for you, maybe a little bit out of left field, but I'm just curious to get your thoughts. Obviously, in our listening audience here, we have entrepreneurs in the payments space that have started companies like what you're doing. We also have investors, we have private equity people, we have fintech, right? How do you think about capital as it relates to growing the business? You know what I mean? Like, when is it the right time to bootstrap? When is it the right time to bring in venture capital or seed funds or angel investors? I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you think about capital macro as you look at your growth strategy? And, when is it the right time to access outside capital versus just kind of, because our industry does tend to throw off some cash as well with most businesses, so just curious to get your thoughts on the capital piece.
For a while, I had mixed feelings on it. I wanted to be able to maintain that control, and really, if I made a decision, it was my decision. If I was wrong, it was my call.
Right.
And then over time, I kind of started, really looking at it again and saying, okay, I can grow, I can become fairly large, decent known name. I can make an impact in the industry. But if I really want to get out there and really connect with as many people as possible, I felt we needed to bring capital on. And so we made that shift a couple months ago to actually start bringing capital investors on. And they like the fintech industry. It's a big industry. So I think maybe in 2021, I think around 20-25% of all money that went out from VCs went into the fintech space. So that's a pretty significant chunk of change. Now, obviously, there's a lot of niches on it. Are you going into emerging markets? Are you doing a crypto play? So and it really depends on the VC if that's what they're looking to invest in at the time.
Right.
But we decided to bring on investors to be able to scale and grow quickly, to be able to really do all the development work, bring in the human component, and scale a little bit faster. And I know it's been in the news recently. Hey, fintech, laying off a lot of people.
Right.
Oh, we overhired. So we're trying to take a little bit staggered approach to it, where we're putting in, okay, we believe we may need 20 more people, but we're going to hire them in blocks of 5. So we don't end up in that situation where we hired all 20 and we're like, oops, well, market's turning on you. We need to lay off 20%.
Right.
So that's one thing that we're looking at. But it's really a business decision, and it's really up to the person. If you're in a local market in Chicago, and you just want to stay in Chicago, and that's what you want to do, help out the local community, then it may not be the best fit for you to raise funds. If you're going to go international and you really want to look at scaling and interacting with a lot of people, then you probably need capital.
Yeah. It's a good answer. I think, like you said, it's a very personal decision. It's kind of what you got to look at your objectives, and it's definitely a big decision, right? I mean, bringing on outside capital, in some ways, it's people say, it's kind of like you just got married, or so right. So it's definitely a very important decision. It's not one to take lightly, but I think I think you got to look at your objectives, right, and see where it makes sense.
I can tell you though, from my experience with it, the best thing for somebody to do is and this is where it really becomes overwhelming for an entrepreneur, a single owner. You really need a team, but you have to look at, okay, I was building an ISO and a payment company. Now I also have to be an expert in finance and raising funds. And that's, so now you're wearing two hats.
Yeah.
But I would say try to get as close to an MVP, try to get, 3 to 5 customers, do proof of concept, and then go out and raise capital.
Right.
That little bit makes such a big difference and impact when you're talking to investors. Before that, it's all hypotheticals.
Right.
But once you get a couple paid customers, now you can be like, look, I have proof of concept. Here it is. The model works. And then you can produce all those KPIs that they want to see. What's your customer acquisition cost? What is your ARR? What's the lifetime value of these people? And so you're going to be able to provide a little bit more information, and that's going to allow you as a business owner to retain a little bit more control, not give up so much equity, having a little bit negotiation power. So for us, when we went out to raise capital, we actually were producing revenue. We were cash flow positive. So we don't need their money. So it puts us in a very different boat than somebody like, hey, I need this money to finish my build, and I need this money to get to market to acquire customers. So because of that, I can negotiate a little bit better on terms. And if the deal doesn't seem right, I can find somebody else.
Yep.
Right.
I love it.
Right.
Good stuff. Well, hey,
Gives you more power.
Yeah, it does. Definitely. So Josh, this is great. I know we have a lot of more things we could talk about, but we'll stop it there. But before we let you jump off today, if we have those who want to reach out to you, maybe on the capital side, maybe on, ISOs or others in the payment center that want to learn more about you or partnering or whatever it might be, where would you send them to learn more about CardZen?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn, so Joshua Benedetti, or they can go to cardzen.com, and it's CARDZ3n.com. Go to contact us and just submit through there, put a little note in what you're looking for, and we'll reach out.
Awesome. Josh, thank you so much for taking time today. Really appreciate the insights and your time.
Yeah, really
thank you.
So Patti, I want to talk for a second about NMI, and rather than diving too deep into the topic today, because we're about to talk about it in the Insider Share in a little bit, I want to talk about security for a second, Patti. And our industry a lot of times takes this for granted.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't.
And so do our clients, right? So do the merchants. Yeah.
They just say, well, okay, we're going to use this gateway, we're going to use that gateway. Which one's cheaper?
Right. Right.
Well, what's cheaper? You using a gateway and getting a $70,000 fraud, situation, and then getting investigated by the card brands? All of a sudden, is it cheaper?
Yeah.
So,
right.
I would really encourage you to think about NMI as a partner in technology that has the latest and greatest technology. We talk about it more in the Insiders, but needless to say, recently my developers were looking at doing some research on our own, for our software, we have different software companies, and saying, where are our weaknesses and vulnerabilities? Because this obviously is something I'm passionate about. And they said, hey, James, there's a whole new way of doing this on these web forms that collect card information that can make sure you don't have these skimming devices and spam and all that, or scams. And they said, we need to implement it. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I agree. What do we do? And well, we're integrated with NMI. And they said, well, NMI already has the APIs. They already have everything ready to go, but we have to go in and change. So they spent, a couple of days going through eating all of our payment forms and all of our different softwares with the new NMI technology that is the top security out there. And it once again just reminded me how important it is to have a partner like NMI that knows what they're doing.
It really is, because these fraud tactics, they evolve so quickly.
Oh my, it's amazing.
Right? I mean, I used to write about fraud a lot, and we used to say it was like a game of whack-a-mole, right?
Yep.
And this is really important, and having a partner like NMI that really looks out for these types of problems, these inherent problems in the payment system, I think is really important. Please go to nmi.com to learn more, and tell them we sent you.
So, Patti, I want to talk today about raising capital, because that would be a great kind of segue from our interview that we just had.
Perfect segue, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk more about this because it's a topic that I have a lot of experience in, and we don't really talk about as much. And so I thought it would be interesting. So
Good to let people benefit from your experience, because I know you do have a lot of experience in this area.
Well, I'll do my best. So, yeah, so let's talk about different sources of capital depending on where you're at in your journey in the payments industry. Okay. So the first source of capital is the buyout. And so for those of you listening that aren't aware of this concept, if you take your current residual, monthly residual, so we get the last 3 months, what's your average monthly residual, you could most likely sell that residual or some portion of it. You can most likely sell that residual. And then I would say an industry average for a smaller portfolio of under $10,000 a month, you could probably sell that portfolio for something like a 20x to 24x would be an industry average. So if you said, well, I've got, 12,000 in residual, but a couple thousand is new or whatever, I've got 10,000 kind of seasoned residual. You could probably sell that 10,000 for $200,000 to $240,000. You could get most of it up front. Some of it would end up probably being an earnout. Patti and I actually wrote a fantastic 80-page ebook on this, if you remember, Patti, on the buyout.
I remember. It was
a couple years ago, but I still have it. It's at ccsalespro.com/buyout. So check that out. Really, really good book on that. Now, a lot of people in our industry don't like the buyout. They think it's just the worst thing that you can do. I think all of these concepts could be the worst thing you could do. Depends on.
It all depends on your situation, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
my philosophy and what I did or in the payment space that I really believe in is I sold the accounts that I knew were likely to cancel, meaning they had a standalone terminal. And I used that capital to go buy free hardware, point of sale systems, hire employees to go after software relationships and things of that nature. I didn't really, ever say it this way before, but really that's exactly what I'm still doing today. I have my consulting advertising business, which is extremely profitable. And I take the cash from that and I pay developers, marketing, sales to build our software companies. And so I have statement analysis software company, I have a training software company. I have the property management software I mentioned earlier on the episode. So I still do the same thing today. I just really believe that there's ways to generate value where it's not value that I necessarily want long term. Right? It doesn't have a lot of long-term importance or value to me, but I can sell it.
Right?
Yeah, I can sell it, or I can generate cash from it and I can dump that into something else.
Right.
So I think that's a really important way to look at it. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs think they're kind of above that. It's like, well, I don't want to go out there and like Josh talking about, he's out there pounding the pavement, generating those first few deals, cold calling and all of that. And that's just super important to be willing to do that to get where you want. So you have the buyout. The second one that you have is you actually have the idea of borrowing money against your residual as collateral.
Right.
And there are several companies that do this. The cost of that capital is pretty high, so you're going to pay a pretty high interest rate. However, it can be a good deal. I actually did it several times. I won't give any names here, but there were some people I did this with, and we borrowed. I think in one case I did maybe 100,000, 150,000 that we borrowed at one point early on when we were building one of our first ISOs. And, I don't regret it at all. They took, I think, 12% of our residuals. So the way it works is you reassign your residuals to that person. So let me give you an example. Let's say I borrow $100,000 and I agree to pay $10,000 a month for 10 months, right? Obviously, it wouldn't be that, 'cause you'd have interest on top, and it usually be a little return, but to make the math easy. So I have 100,000, I borrowed 100,000. Now let's say my residuals were $100,000 a month, right?
Okay.
Now you might ask, well, then why would you need to borrow $100,000? Well, the reason is because out of that 100,000, I'm paying 70,000 in agent residuals. I'm paying another 25,000 in employee payroll, right? Leaving you with $5,000. I don't have very much money to grow with, so I might borrow 100,000. I can put all into growth and then pay back. The way it would work is your 100,000 in residual would get reassigned. The payment would get reassigned to the person you borrowed the money from, the company.
Okay.
Then the 100,000 goes to them. They take out their $10,000 payment, and then they give you the other 90. So they know for sure they're going to get their money. It's guaranteed.
Because they have first crack at it.
Exactly. And then they take out their payment and forward it onto you. So that's a form of capital in our industry. So both of those two would be more kind of the very, very, very beginning stages. And for those who are, you've built a payments business and now you say, I really want to bring software into my business. So I need to pay developers $70,000 to build this really cool little app that I'm going to use for invoicing or whatever it is. And you're like, you want to get that money right away. You go get that 70,000 by selling part of your business and you got to build it back up again, selling part of your portfolio, or by borrowing against it. Now, as we move up the chain a little bit, then you get into things like angel investors, seed rounds, things like that. And this is more traditional. So the first two are kind of more really specifically for payment processing.
Right.
When you get into things like angel investing, there's fantastic books and resources on that. But this is usually where you're getting individuals to write you checks for anywhere from $25,000 to $250,000. And as Josh just mentioned, at that point, you are going to generally want people who you're going to want your business to be at a point where you have some leverage, you've built something, you've proven that there's something there. And most importantly, you're going to have a really, really compelling reason that you need the money, that you're going to use the money. So what you have to understand about the world of the angel investor, especially, and even the venture capitalist, you have to understand that these investors, they are not looking for a modest return from you. That's not interesting to them. They know that if they make 10 investments, what they expect is they expect 4 or 5 of those 10 to fail completely. They expect 2 or 3 to work out pretty well, where they can maybe flip it to a private equity firm or something like that. Or generate a little bit of cash flow. But then they expect like 1 out of that 10, 1 or 2 to make them 50 times what they invested. So in other words, to get that money, you have to pitch a big vision that you are going to grow 50, 100 times where you're at today in valuation. And so to get that money, you need to have a big vision. So, use the first 2 if you're just kind of saying, oh, I think I want to just do something here. But if you really want to build something big, you have to have that vision to get investors involved. Otherwise, they're not going to do it.
Right.
So then you get past that stage. And a lot of people, it's like you say, well, I didn't have to do any buyouts. I didn't borrow against my residuals. Never got any investors. And we're bringing in $100,000 a month. Right. So you're serious, you've got some serious money here. This is the idea of if somebody bought your business, how much cash flow would they be able to generate?
Right.
And so now when we got, let's call it $1 or $2 million a year that you're generating in profitability, that would be on the low side. You probably want to get closer to 5 million a year before private equity is going to be super interested in that. But a private equity firm is a company where they come in and they will buy your entire business. That's what they do. So they buy the entire business and then they give you the capital that you need to really grow, but they also give you the oversight and they give you the motivation that you need. So you kind of become an employee of their organization, really. Now, of course, if they're going to buy you out, they're assuming that if you're planning to stick around, they believe that you're capable of running the business successfully. They don't want to micromanage you, but you're going to have results that you need to hit. And if you don't hit those results, well, then they're going to come in and they're going to have an issue. Now, the way you make a lot of money with private equity is most private equity funds, they try to flip the businesses they buy 3 to 7 years after they buy it. And there's this process they go through. And so private equity firms, there's this kind of hierarchy. So you have like Blackstone, which is like the largest one, and different private equity firms. So you have private equity firms that are smaller, and they'll go and buy a business for $5, $10, $20 million. And then they'll try to, through their use of capital and efficiency and everything else, they will try to work with that founder to say, hey, we can give you a lot of resources. Let's make the company be worth, instead of 20 million, let's take it to 150 million over 7 years. Then they go and sell it to Blackstone or to another private equity firm. So what happens is when you sell the company, let's say you sold your company for $10 million, the private equity firm would say, hey, if you're going to stay on as CEO, instead of giving you 10 million, we'd like to give you 8 million. And we want your 2 million to be stock in the new entity that we're going to create through this private equity. So now if we can sell it instead of 10 million, if we can sell it for 50 million, your 2 million is going to be worth a lot more money. So the reason people do the private equity deals is because it's kind of an interesting move, because it's kind of a staged exit strategy. It's like, eventually I want to exit this business, but not really yet. And so it's kind of like, I've gotten the business as far as I can with my current connections and capital. So I want to bring another company in that's going to infuse just millions of dollars in capital into my business, and that's going to help me with my operating processes and the finance aspect of things, and really give us all the resources we need to go acquire companies and like really build something big. And then I'm still going to be able to run the business as long as that's what I've negotiated and I'm competent to do such. I'm going to be able to run the business knowing that I work for this other company now. So if I do a bad job, they can fire me, right? That's the risk I take now. It's not my business anymore. But I can run this thing for 5, 6, 7 years, and then they're going to flip it to another private equity firm, and then I can exit at that point, or maybe I flip one more time. And so I know people that have done private equity 2, 3 times.
2 or 3 times, yeah, same here, right?
Over 15 years, they've run a company and they've made, they made 2 million the first time, they made 7 million the next time, and they're on track to make 50 million the third time. So I know plenty of people in our industry that have done.
In our industry, I know many people in our industry that have done that. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that is the idea of raising capital in short. And so hopefully that will give some of you a little bit of an idea.
So James, this week I wanted to do a little bit of an update on fraud. We haven't talked about this a lot lately. I know we talked about it a few weeks ago with regard to Zelle. That's the P2P payments platform that's been plagued by fraud. I think that demonstrated something that made me really realize, how cybersecurity, especially as it relates to payments, is really taking center stage. And this week I saw 2 new reports out of Visa showing how fraudsters are shifting their focus. Like a couple years ago, when we saw a lot of people migrating online, so did the fraudsters. But now that people are starting to go back into stores, fraudsters are, picking up the in-person fraud routines. It's a double whammy for merchants, really, because these fraudsters are continuing to target e-commerce, with malware, ransomware, phishing attacks, among other things. But for example, we're seeing a pretty significant increase in card-present threats like card skimming at ATMs as well as at older POS devices. I saw an article just this morning on my news feed, about it was like, and it just boggled my mind because it was a convenience store that had an ATM. Like you could see, they showed the picture. It was like in the back corner of the store.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going to put a skimming device on, what better place to do it than in a machine that's in the back corner of the store?
Sure.
Of course, on the other hand, I saw another article just the other day about an ATM that was at the front of the store where somebody backed up their truck and broke the window and took the ATM. So I guess there's a trade-off there. But it really was interesting to me. It said, because according to Visa's report, from June through November of 2021, Visa says it saw a 176% increase in detected skimming devices compared to the same period in 2020. That's pretty significant,
Yeah.
But still the digital e-commerce environment, vastly accelerated by the pandemic, remains a rich target for cyber crooks, which is perhaps why a majority of merchants, 59%, say that cybersecurity threats are the biggest challenges that they face in regards to digital payments. Now, here's a couple things that I thought were interesting from Visa's report. Nearly 3/4 of the data breach cases investigated by Visa's global risk team involved e-commerce merchants. Often they were social engineering and ransomware attacks. Digital skimming attacks targeting e-commerce platforms and third-party code integrators are common. And these digital skimming, this is something I just learned. Digital skimming involves fraudsters deploying malicious code onto a merchant's website that targets checkout pages, then harvests payment data like PAN and CVV expiration dates. And of course, I was amazed that this was able to happen. Visa pins the blame, not surprisingly, on lax merchant security controls.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, and you know what? I can. This is interesting, actually, because I mean,
mhm.
this is kind of our commercial for NMI here.
Yeah,
But
great.
one of the things that's actually super interesting, Patty, and I didn't know you were going to talk about this today, but we literally just had this situation come up. Not that we had a scam or anything, but we are in the process of revamping our integrations with
Right.
NMI and another company with one of our software companies.
Mhm.
And it turns out that since we built it like a year and a half ago,
Right.
there is like this whole new way that you do it. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to dive into all the technical details because, frankly, it took me a while for my lead developer to explain it to me. It's really complicated.
But it probably made your head explode, right?
It did, and it is exactly because of this. And so I think one
Right.
of the key things people to realize is that security plays a huge role in, you say, well, which gateway should I use? We'll just use this one. Well, hold on a
Yeah,
second,
that's yeah, that could
right?
come back and bite you.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting. I think it's very important to know that, I mean, even the last 18 months, if you're dealing with merchants that are card not present and they built a shopping cart, or they built a web
Mhm.
form that grabs information, what you're describing, Patty, is exactly right, that it's not that hard for someone to use the latest technology to embed a skimming device on your website.
Yeah, yeah.
You can end up
And
having some liability for that. So you probably need to take a quick look at the security.
it's probably a good idea, and again, like I said, I wasn't as aware of this,
Yeah,
until I started doing some research. And like
right.
I said, it made my head pretty much explode. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know they could do that.
Yeah.
Another thing that's really crazy is all these crypto frauds, with, malware, focused on browser extension wallets.
Yeah.
There's also something I had not noticed. It was called these crypto bridge services, which allow crypto holders to transfer their crypto assets from one blockchain to another. These apparently are hot targets. Between in January and February of this year, three sizable thefts exploiting vulnerabilities in these various bridge services
Yeah.
netted cyber thieves over $400 million, according to Visa's research. Now, in reporting all these findings, Visa made note of the $9 billion, $9 billion with a B, that it has invested in network security over the last 5 years.
Wow. Good night.
Right? That's money that went towards the hiring of fraud specialists, as well as AI technology that can prevent and detect fraud. AI monitoring alone, though, this is what I really kind of made me sit up and take notice. AI monitoring alone blocked 4.2 billion in fraudulent payments last year.
Wow.
Many of these were potential frauds that merchants and cardholders knew nothing about. That's like half of what they invested right there.
Well, and the question is, what would it have been if they hadn't made those investments?
Exactly, which kind of brings me to my final point, which is, with all these investments that are being made, these are things you need to kind of remind yourself and remind your merchants of. I mean, when merchants start complaining about the high cost of card acceptance, it's important to remember fraud prevention is not cheap, and neither is fraud.
Wow, great statement. Thanks, Patty.
Mm-hmm.